Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itamar. It's Friday, Parashat Noach. And here we are, 2 weeks in the war. 2 weeks already. We're in this war situation. And we still don't see the end of it. It didn't really begin yet. We are threatened from all fronts, not only from the Gaza, but we just heard about Yemen yesterday and about Iraq. And of course Iran, Syria. Israel is surrounded by many, many enemies. But we must always remind ourselves that we are God's everlasting people, and no force in the world can eliminate the people of Israel. It doesn't mean, of course, that there can't be, God forbid, those injured and killed and hurt. We've been through such terrible tragedies. But the nation of Israel, the worst scenarios, the worst situations that we've been through, at the end of the day, we've always come out at the end. We always saw the light at the end of the tunnel. We have to always remain positive and realize that no matter how much terrible things can happen, at the end, we will for sure persevere and we will come out of all this. But right now, we're in a situation where we seem to be locked in around many. Our borders are threatened. We have threats from within the country as well. Let's not forget here in Itamar, Judea and Samaria, we are threatened by many surrounding hostile villages of Hamas, Jihad, Fatah. They're all the same. And as we travel on our roads, we have to, of course, constantly be vigilant, or God forbid, they trying to do something similar to run on the communities of Judea and Samaria, to decide to run with their weapons and enter communities. So this is really what our threat is over here. Other parts of Israel have more threat of the missile attacks. Here in our area, we have less issues with missiles, more issues of as actual infiltrations to the community. And of course, on the border, northern border, you have both missiles and infiltration. Every part is a different. There's not one really place in Israel that doesn't have its threat. Right now, most people, they were evacuated. And a lot of people from Israel have been evacuated from the south, and now they're talking about evacuating the city of Kiryat Shmone. So hundreds of thousands of people are evacuating, and they're going to bring them to safer areas, which is towards the area of Yam HaMelech, the Dead Sea area, is really housing a lot of the evacuees. With this situation here, and the most important thing again is to remember the word, we must remain with faith and encouragement, knowing that God will bring us the proper salvation. At the end, we will succeed over our enemies. And the spirit in Israel is tremendously uplifted, where our soldiers and everyone is strong with their faith, and knowing that Am Yisrael, this is our one country that God has given us. We have no other country. This is the land that God gave us, and here we will stay, and here we remain, and here we will build our land forever, no matter what. And this is part of what's going on now, is part of the war of our survival, part of Yom Ha'atzmaut, the war of independence. This is continuing those wars. It's a continuous war, a constant battle. And we can't let anyone tell us there's a difference, try to distinguish between the Hamas or Fatah or Jihad. They all have one goal in mind, is to push Israel into the sea and to try to kill as many Jews as they can. And that's really their goal. And these dangerous, dangerous organizations, and we've been yelling and screaming this for years, the settlers, and unfortunately, we suffered. We suffered the ripping us out of our homes in northern Samaria and Gush Katif, and the terrible things that we suffered, and to be blamed, calling Meshichistim, right? They're calling us Messianic Meshichistim because we, believe that Israel has a right to the entire land, and Israel will one day build a temple. Our third temple will be rebuilt, and we believe in obviously the building a country of spirituality, of Torah, of prophecy, walk again in the land. All the promises that the Torah promises were called Meshichistim. There's an expression in Hebrew, it's called Meshichistim. There's a lot of the left like calling the religious Zionists. And why do they call us that again? Is because for them it's a scary word, it's a scary concept to talk about Israel, Eretz Yisrael Shlema, the complete Israel, or building the kingdom of Israel, a godly kingdom. They're afraid that maybe perhaps there'll be a Sanhedrin again, which of course it will be. And they're afraid of these concepts, these things scaring them. And because they grew up totally with secularism. And I want to tell a story. And I want to mention a story that I just saw this week, which was fascinating, one woman who was a totally secular woman from one of the kibbutzim, the kibbutz Be'eri, which was many lost their lives in kibbutz Be'eri in the south 2 weeks ago. And she said she's totally a non-religious woman, but her daughter returned to her, to practice her faith, Orthodox Judaism. Her daughter and married an Orthodox man. They were Baruch Hashem, she has grandchildren, and they returned to their faith and all that. So mentioning it when she was telling how she survived the attack of the Hamas. She was saying something miraculous took place, literally. Her grandchildren actually taught her how to bless over the 4 species of lulav and etrog, and she was talking about how they told her, to have, faith in God, and teaching about faith in God, and munah b'kadosh baruch hu, and God will watch over you and protect you. And she was mentioning these things that she learned from her family, from her daughter that became religious again, and she learned from her grandchildren. And when there was an attack, and she went into her safe room, she literally survived the 48 hours, and she was saying over and over again, mention, God, Kadosh Baruch Hu, God, you're going to take care of me, you're going to protect me, you're going to save me. Literally, she felt like she was covered with a wall of protection in the safe room. She doesn't know how she survived this. They were trying to come in every way. Miraculously, her daughter had some locksmith put in a very, very good lock in there a while back, and literally they were trying every way to Hamas to get into the safe room that she was in. And after 48 hours, she knew what was going on. She found herself, she had to get out because again, she rationed a few little cookies she had and a little water she had. And then when she heard the little things calming down a little bit, she decided she found herself on the windowsill of the bomb shelter there, and she climbed out of the window. When she came out, she was so thirsty. Right in front of her, she found a bottle of water, and then she found one of those, carts, electric carts, in the kibbutzim for the elderly. She jumped on one and she drove literally right into the hands of the soldiers. It was a fascinating story. A woman who grew up really with nothing, but we see that a message of faith that was given to her by her grandchildren is what kept her alive, gave her the power to live and to survive this terrible madness when death was all around her. Now, the message is very clear, and we spoke about this before, is that the whole holiday of Sukkot, that right after the holiday of Sukkot, this came upon us, was the holiday where we go out of our homes and we enter the Sukkah, and the Sukkah is the building of faith. We don't look at a roof. A roof represents a barrier between the heavens and the earth, right? Because it blocks off the light of the heavens that comes down. The Sukkah has openings in it, right? So it reflects the light that comes within, that we are looking to something beyond ourselves. We're looking up to our heavens. We seek our Esainai el Harim. I look up upon the mountains. Ma'ayin yavo ezri. Where will come my help? Ezri min Hashem. God, the help will come from God, right? And that's really what the whole concept of the Sukkah, the schach, unlike the roof. I always say the war of Gog and Magog. What is Gog? The root is Gog. Gog, the war of Gog and Magog is those who don't have the faith. And that's why it's like a roof, without sealing themselves from the heavens. And that's a war of faith that has to be to overcome evil in the world. The evil forces in the world are fed when we have lack of faith in God. The evil forces of the world are able to lift their heads up and overcome and try to, God forbid, attack Israel. But when we show faith in God, nothing can overcome us. Nothing. And here, I want to go from here to a couple of fascinating proofs, or you can call it hints within the Bible, within this week's portion of Noach, that we should take with us as lessons about the situation. And first of all, we can actually see, I'm sure everyone has seen this, so I'm mentioning to those who haven't yet seen it, because it's so clear. The minute you read your portion, we know we have a halacha that we must read the portion twice, together with the Targum Onkelos. And if we read the portion, we will see right away what comes up in chapter 6 of this week's portion in Genesis, verses 9 to 13. It's a story of Noah, right? What happens regarding destruction of mankind. And it says, these are the generations of Noach. Noach was a righteous person, in his degeneration, and he walked with God. And he had 3 children, Shem, Cham, and Yefet. And then the verse number 11, which I want to talk about. The verse says, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew and English because here it's fascinating. The word Hamas appears in the verse. Vatishachet ha'aretz lefnei Elohim. And the land became corrupt before God. Vatimaleh ha'aretz Hamas. And the land became full of Hamas. Hamas literally means violence, right? And that's one way of explaining the word. But that's the word, the way it's translated in English. But in Hebrew, it's Hamas. So the land was full of Hamas, these terrorists, this evil. Of course, they choose a really nice name for their organization, which means to steal, to rob. Vayar Elohim, and God saw that the land that was corrupt, because mankind corrupted his way on the land. Vayom Elohim leNoach, and God says to Noach, Kates kol basar, the end of man has come before me, because the land is again filled with Hamas. And I will destroy the land. Now here, it's like hinting that God will destroy the land. Here, Hamas, they're inside the land, literally in the ground, hidden underneath in tunnels. But whatever it is, if we look at the translation of the Targum Yonatan ben Onkelos, the Targum Onkelos, Yonatan ben Uziel was also a translator, but the Targum Onkelos, as we know, is known as Onkelos the convert, the Ger, who lived around the 2nd century, 3rd century of the Common Era. And he, as we know, was one of the Tanaim, and he translated the entire Tanakh, the entire Chamishah Chumshei Torah, the entire 5 books of the Torah. And our rabbis say his translation was given on Sinai. And sort of that he revealed, he sort of restored or brought back to a very, very important translation that literally comes together with the Torah. Onkelos' translation is revered extremely in all, in our circles. And what does he say? And here, the words he uses to translate Hamas are mind-boggling. What does he say? In verse 11 we'll read, Vitchabalat ara, the land became corrupt. Now he chooses the word to say the land became corrupt, Vitchabalat. Chaba, we know in Hebrew, now this is in Aramaic, correct? The translation was written in Aramaic. But there's a lot of connection between the two, Hebrew and Aramaic. They go together, they're very similar languages in certain ways. Vitchabalat, the word in Hebrew, chabal means to destroy, right? To make, the modern word in Hebrew for a terrorist is a mechabel, chabala. So the word he chooses here is that root of a mechabel. Vitchabalat, of a terrorist. Ara, the land became corrupt before God. And then he continues to say, Vit meliat ara chatufin. And the land became full of chatufin, right? What is chatufin in Hebrew? Someone who's chatuf, someone who's kidnapped. So literally, he's hinting also very clearly in the Onkelos, is to those who were kidnapped by the Hamas and the terrible deeds. And then of course God says that God will eliminate and he will destroy the Hamas at the end. They will be eradicated because of their terrible ways. And that, as we see right here, is one of the hints, as I mentioned in this week's portion, that we have to take as a message, that here we see, this is what, we always say in Yenei Diyomath, current events appear always in the portion of the week, and right here, so strongly, you have to be blind and not to see a clear hint. And this has to strengthen our faith that this is what's going on. This is the battle right now in the world over this corruption that we have to fight off. I'd like to bring another source brought down in Isaiah. Now Isaiah, before I get to Isaiah, I'd like to bring down Psalms. There's a Psalms 74, which I think is also important to look at. In Psalm 74, as we know, the Psalm talks about the situation of after the destruction of, when Nebuchadnezzar came, the Babylonian king, and destroyed our temple. But of course it hints to the other future events as well. And as we know, all prophecies, all our holy writings are for all time, not only for the time they were written, but for surely here, the commentaries talk about it, the discussion of which different times they're referring to, and for sure there are commentaries that talk about it being at the end of days. And here, and I want to read just 2 verses of this psalm. You should read the whole psalm. I'm going to read 2 verses. If we look at verse 4, it says, Shagu tzorerecha bekerev moadecha. Your enemies were shouting out, bekerev, amongst your moadecha. Now, moadecha literally means festivals, right? Moadecha. in your gatherings, but here it's talking about when we get together, mo'adecha, in your festivals. So here we know the Hamas attacked us during our festivals. Right here it's very clear, samu ototam otot. So look at verse number 4. I want to go to another verse. In verse 20 of that same Psalm 74, it says, Habet labrit, we're asking God to look at the covenant with Israel. Ki malu machshakei eretz, neot Hamas. Because the dark places, here this is a fascinating verse, it's hinting to where the Hamas are hiding out. It's saying, God, please look at the covenant you have with us. Why? Because machshakei eretz, the dark places of the land are filled up with neot Hamas, with the dwellings of Hamas. And obviously, we can understand it very clearly as the underground city the Hamas built. The dark places of the ground, that is where they have their neot. Neot means their palaces. They built their evil palace under the ground in the dark places of the land. And as we ask Hashem not to forget us, to stand with us, and not to forsaken us. And this is all about this psalm. And that's the second source I wanted to bring in. I want to bring a third from Isaiah now. And Isaiah, we know, is the prophet of consolation, always giving us encouragement. And Isaiah says in chapter 60, which is a psalm at the end of days, and he says like this, and I just want to read verse number 18. We'll begin there. He says, Lo yishama od Hamas be'altzech. There will be no longer heard in your land Hamas. No longer be heard in the land of Israel. Shod v'sheva b'gvulayich. There will be no more showed robbery and terrible brokenness in your borders. V'karat yeshua chomotayich, and your walls you will call salvation. U'sha'arayich, and your gates tehillah, and your gates you will call praise. In other words, we will look at the walls and the gates of Jerusalem, as those were our walls of protection. The walls of the temple, the walls of our spirituality, that is going to bring us the true salvation at the end of the day. There will be no longer Hamas. And I have to always stress, Rav Kook says something very powerful and profound. Because, when we're saying that we must rely on God, and we must have faith in God, it doesn't mean we have to give up our, say totally sit around and, God forbid, don't respond to this evil, obviously. Obviously, we must respond to evil and fight like King David and all the warriors of the Bible were warriors. But it says, Eila v'rechev, they would come with chariots. Ve'ela basusim, they come with horses. V'anachnu b'shem Hashem naskir, but we will mention God's name. What does that mean? Rav Kook says, on the chariots and on the horses we will mention Hashem's name. In other words, we have to do everything in our humanly possible in the realm of nature to fight off our enemies. But we must bear in our hearts the faith in Hashem. And here we see again, in the other verse I mentioned to you before. And I want to end with one other Rashi, another source. And Rashi in this week's portion, we talks about the Tower of Babylon. And here in the story of the Tower of the Babylon, Rashi asks a great question. Rashi says like this, and brought down in chapter 11, verse 9. Rashi says, and he says, V'chi ezel kashe, goes, isn't this difficult? Rashi brings a difficulty. Shel dor amabul dor shel haflaga. Rashi brings a difficulty. What is difficulty? He says, who did more evil? The generation of the flood or the generation of division, which led to the building of the tower? Elo lo pashtu yad bi'ikar, ve'elo pashtu yad bi'ikar. Rashi says the generation of the division of who built the Tower of Babylon, Nimrod, they actually rebelled against God. It was direct rebellion against God. But so Rashi says, why were those of the generation of the flood wiped out totally eliminated from the world, and the generation of the Tower of Babylon, they were scattered, they weren't wiped out? And Rashi says something very beautiful, so profound, we have to take it to our hearts from the Midrash. And Rashi says like this, and this lesson is for Israel. We have to take this very, very deep in our hearts. And Rashi says, he says like this, the generation of the flood, Hayu gazlanim, they were crooks. And they would fight with one another, and they didn't get along with one another. And therefore they were totally eliminated. Right? I'm sorry, but these, Rashi says, who are these? The generation of the Tower of Babylon, they had love and brotherly love between one another. As it says, what does it say if we look at the opening verse regarding the building of the Tower of Babylon? What does it say? Safa achat udvarim achadim. They were together with one tongue and one language, right? They were all together, united on their goals, and they were totally united, focused. And therefore, the fact that they had that unity, that gave them that great quality of love between brothers and sisters, that gave them the salvation. And Rashi says, we learn from here that argument is hated and peace is so great. So this lesson, of course, I think is such a profound lesson to bring, not only that we see the hints that the battle now against this evil of Hamas has to be eliminated and all of that, and it will be eliminated, as he said before, but we also have to see that the remedy, our secret weapon of salvation is our brotherly love. In Israel, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's been terrible, terrible strife over the reform, the judicial reform that the right wing wanted to implement, and all the left coming and shouting "Busha," disgrace, and demonstrating against our parliament members, etc., their homes, and a lot of terrible anti-religious things going on, which culminated into disrupting our prayers on Yom Kippur service. Can you imagine? And not allowing dancing on Simchat Torah, dancing with the Torah scrolls, all these terrible things, and we see blind hatred against brothers and sisters, calling names, calling the religious camp and the Zionistic camp Nazis, and also crazy names. And unfortunately, that lack of brotherly love and hatred came and led to the terrible tragedy we saw. But if we now we see that this has already changed the country, the atmosphere has totally reversed itself, and the majority, there's still some very, very radical small groups that will still yell and scream and say stupid things, and it comes from emptiness. But the majority now, whether religious or non-religious, are walking together to defend and walk together in harmony, showing the brotherly love that we're in this together. This is the nation we have. We are the people of Israel, and we will stand up together and united, and we will succeed in winning and beating out the enemy. And God, and I'm saying, B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, after this terrible war is over, with all the difficulty we've been through, we're going to begin again. There will be in the beginning, a new beginning for Israel. We will go forward in giant steps, in making big changes, making our country beautiful and happy again. As we all know in this country, we are very special people, and we have to believe in who we are, and believe in and rely on Hashem, and we shall succeed. Shabbat Shalom, Besarot Tovot, Yeshuot v'Nechamot.